PVLP 100.1 FM in Bradenton. We are live from the Fogartyville Community Media and Arts Center here in Sarasota, and we are getting ready for an hour of talk and analysis on the events that are happening in our town today. This is Talk of the Town.
In the so-called free state of Florida, the powers that be in Tallahassee have increasingly curtailed the ability of individual cities and counties to make their own decisions and control their own fates. What's happened to the state's history of granting home rule powers to local municipalities for self-governance? What's behind the state's determination to repeatedly preempt local decisions and control? And what impacts have state preemptions had in Sarasota and Manatee? All this and more on today's Talk of the Town. Good morning and welcome to Talk of the Town. I'm your host, Carrie Seidman, and we're coming to you live from the Fogartyville Community Media and Arts Center in Sarasota. We're happy to have a wonderful studio audience here today, and we're also grateful to those of you who are joining us on the radio or on our Facebook live stream. In 1968, the state of Florida, with the approval of voters, passed a constitutional amendment granting general home rule power to cities and counties, culminating in the 1973 Home Rule Powers Act that solidified local authority over services like water, zoning, law enforcement, and allowed local governments to manage their own affairs. In recent years, however, the state has increasingly preempted local initiatives and decision-making in numerous cases, from prohibiting elimination of plastic grocery bags or an assault weapons ban to last year's Senate Bill 180, which, under the guise of hurricane recovery, restricts local governments from enacting stricter land use rules, even for environmental protection. I'm fortunate to have with me today three guests who've been following this situation and who, in some cases, have been pushing back against the state. Hopefully they can shed some light on what's been taken away thus far and what other preemptions may be in the pipeline and brewing in the upcoming legislation session that begins this week. And maybe they'll have some ideas as well about how we can fight back against a further erosion of local control. So let me introduce them now. First, I'd like to welcome Manatee County Commissioner George Kruse, who I will just add gave up watching his daughter's soccer match today in order to be with us here. I don't know whether to feel grateful or guilty, but
I just think we sound like a bad dad.
No. He made a special exception in this case, and I'm very appreciative. Commissioner Kruse is a Cardinal Mooney graduate. He served on the Manatee County Commission since 2020, and most recently as the chair in 2025. As an at-large commissioner, he has advocated for home rule and limited government, as well as affordable housing, multimodal transportation, and animal welfare. He's active on the state level on policy development and advocacy through a leadership role with the Florida Association of Counties, and he shares his policy thoughts on his Substack platform, Policy 68. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Also with us today is longtime Bradenton journalist Dennis Mitch Maley. Mitch has been an editor and Sunday columnist for the Bradenton Times since 2010. And now also hosts the Times weekly podcast. A graduate of Shippensburg University who later served as a captain in the U.S. Army, Mitch is the author of 3 novels and a short story collection, and his next book, Fishkill, is scheduled for release next summer. Thanks for being here, Mitch.
Thank you for having me.
And our final guest is a member of the grassroots nonpartisan group Save Florida Home Rule. Mark Hebden moved to Holmes Beach 10 years ago and in 2020 retired from a successful career as an architect, engineer, planner, and consultant. In 2023, he joined Save Florida Home Rule, which was founded to prevent the state legislature from consolidating or dissolving the cities of Anna Maria Island, and more broadly, to prevent the hijacking of other municipalities' decision-making authority. Thank you for being with us, Mark.
On behalf of the Save Florida Home Rule folks, thanks for inviting us. I really appreciate it.
Very, very excited you could have a representative come. To begin with, I just want to kind of set the scene. I think everyone listening probably understands what home rule is, but if we could talk a little bit about exactly what that means and maybe a little bit about the history of home rule in the state of Florida. Mitch, do you want to get us started?
Yeah, well, it's the concept that communities should make the bulk of their decisions that most greatly impact themselves by themselves. And what we've seen recently is a real move towards state-level preemption and tying the hands of local communities in terms of what they're able to decide in terms of ordinances. And this is very, very, it's anti-democratic, but it's also, it opposes conservative leadership, which is, we're dominated by Republican leadership in Manatee County at the state level, and that is really one of the original pillars of conservative ideology, is that small government is best. Government closest to the people is best. There's that old saying, that old adage, keep government small enough that you can still get your hands around its neck. And as local officials will tell you, one of the good things, and sometimes I imagine frustrating things, about being a small government official is that you are surrounded by your constituency constantly. And they can just get in the car, or in some cases walk down the street, and come and see you and sort of make their pitch for what's important to them. And what we've seen recently is a move away from that. My pitch to people when it comes to local elections is always pay very close attention to the county commission, to the school board, to the city council, because they have the greatest impact on what your actual quality of issue lives in most instances are going to be faced with. So they are so much more important in many ways than even national elections for Senate, the House, the presidency. That is becoming less and less true as the state of Florida continues to preempt our ability to govern ourselves, and that's a real serious problem that Floridians should be very concerned about, in my opinion.
So exactly what you just laid out. I was always taught, my father was a lifelong Republican, that it was all about, less government is better, less overreach is better. And so this is all kind of confusing to me. George, maybe you can shed some light on when did the shift started happening? Because there was a point where Florida did honor home rule, correct? Certainly the state, the
Technically,
citizens.
we still have it.
Well-
In theory, on paper, we still have it. This has gotten worse. And I'm not going to say recently, but it's getting worse for a couple of reasons. One, with Citizens United and the change in how elections are run, it's all about money now. Not 100%. Manatee County did very well with lesser dollars for the winners in 2024. But for the most part, it's about money. So you're giving undue influence to lobbyists and people that are in the industry that want things to happen. And people are listening to them. And you make the right donations, you get the right bills passed. So as that gets worse, as money becomes more prevalent in politics, you're going to have people with money have more influence over politics, and it's typically not the guy down the road who walked to see you. The second thing you're seeing as a problem, and it's starting to get worse, is just, I don't care what party you are, supermajorities are terrible for everybody because there's no reason to listen to anybody anymore when you have a supermajority, because you can pass whatever you want to pass, and it's kind of like when the dog catches the car. It's like, even people in politics don't really want to be part of a supermajority per se, because then you're forced to do things supermajorities are supposed to do, and most of them don't want to do that, but they're kind of now forced to based on leadership, or they get primaried. So the stronger the supermajority and the control gets at any level, whether it be at the federal level or in our case the state of Florida, you're going to start seeing more bills like this. And the third thing, and it's not a direct correlation, but I'm sure there's some meaningful correlation to it, is there's a very big top-down populist push right now that started up at the federal level, and you see it right now. I think today I read something about trying to cap credit cards at 10% interest rate. That's taking away limited government under the guise of the bigger government trying to protect the little people by making us the limited government, by extension making themselves the bigger government. I think this populist push of trying to do what they deem people want is starting to become problematic. Especially, you're also seeing at the local level, you're seeing local politicians try to play the populist angle, which is then having the state come in and kind of preempt that as well. We saw that in Manatee County with some plots last year, where people were voting flat out saying they knew they couldn't vote for it. They knew it was illegal to vote for it. They knew they couldn't vote no on it, but they did. And the state stepped in and preempted us by way of not allowing us to vote on plots anymore. They made it administrative. So that's a situation of home rule trying to preempt populism that was going in the wrong direction for the wrong reason. So I think those three things: too much money, too much power, and just too much of a populist bent towards re-elections are driving a lot of this home rule.
Yeah, this is something I haven't understood. Why? Because I'm basically a conservative from my background, and that's similar to you, Carrie. But why is it that our governor here, who would say he would not want the federal government to push down on him, and yet within his party, it's surprising to me that it's within his party that he's supposed to be the party leader, that's pressuring down on us in terms of preempting what we can do at the local level.
What is the state's argument about why this is appropriate, why preemptions are appropriate? I mean, I've heard the argument that they say local governments are out of control and with spending and rulemaking and so forth. What is that, their ostensible argument?
You can listen. You can go back and hear some of the sound clips. When somebody gets elected to Tallahassee, they immediately think they're one of the 140th smartest people in the state of Florida, without fail. They immediately, they got elected on accident, and they walk in there, and all of a sudden they're smarter than every lowly county commissioner, city councilman, fire commissioner, you name it. They are smarter, they know best, and they just can push whatever they want down and just believe that's in the best interest of their community.
See, that's exactly how, an average person, the state of Florida home rule is grassroots, so the average voter looks at it and we say, what does it mean? The people that get elected at one time were just average citizens like us. And then they get elected, and then suddenly, instead of looking into the best interest, like you said, now they think they know the best interest. And the amount of communication, it always is, our group just went and delivered letters to one of our state representatives, and at the end of the meeting, from the folks that went with our group there, said, well, he says, well, I'd like to hear from you. Well, how about could we hear from you? Like, George, you come to the island and you go make the rounds and we can talk to you. But it's like we have to go to the throne room to see these people. And the idea of public service and being a public servant is going away. And part of it is, I think, the supermajority issue is when somebody has a majority, it isn't healthy, because then they think, well, I've got to stay within the group to maintain the majority.
Well, and also you're incentivized. The only way you can, if it's a supermajority, the only way you can get a seat at the table is from the extreme wing of that. So if it's California, you're going to have to be much more liberal than the status quo to have a chance at a primary. Same thing here. Your incentive is not to say, I'm going to come in and be a moderate Republican at the state level, because in the primary you're going to get killed because it's dominated by the base. So you have that aspect, but I also think some of this is a logical endpoint of that Citizens United aspect, in that when special interests get control, and when we see, so 2012 was the first local election after that, and all of a sudden you saw hundreds of thousands of dollars in PAC campaigns against single county commission races. It was something completely new. And as a result, they were able to consolidate all this power at the local level, and they went so out of control with the kind of things like gutting and eviscerating the wetland policy in Manatee County was such an overreach that finally people woke up and said, oh, wait a minute, what's going on here? Who's responsible and how do we vote them out? I think a lot of it is them looking and saying, it's just less costly and more efficient to buy the state government than to buy local ones, because people they're not as organized on a state level as they are in their communities. They don't pay as close of attention. And if we can just make sure Tallahassee is rowing in the right direction, we can count on them to keep the local communities in place.
Let's talk a little bit about Manatee County in specific, because Manatee has really been kind of at the forefront of pushing back a little bit on this state preemptions. George, can you talk about sort of how things were when you first came on the commission in 2020, is that right? And then the flipping of the commission in 2024 and the response to, for example, SB 180?
Sure. Well, I mean, when I got on in 2020, it was you still saw preemptions. I mean, there was the Senate Bill 170, which was literally called the preemption bill to end all preemption bills. And that was like at 21 or 22. So
Well, I'm not familiar with that.
It was basically a bill that said you couldn't preempt anything, and any ordinance that a county puts in place, you had to do a business assessment. And if any business, no matter how small, operates there, could prove that I think it's 15% of their revenue would be affected by the ordinance got thrown out.
Oh.
So that negatively affected, say, closing down bars early in Miami during spring break. That affects the ability to, spray Roundup and have fertilizer ordinances. That affected our retail pet ban because of that. So the point was that they were starting this way back then. They were starting it way before then. It just got more blatant now, and I think it's got more blatant because people are noticing it's not about business ordinances anymore. It's going heavily towards development ordinance or preemptions now. And that had to do with a lot of these counties, Manatee County being one of them, giving a little bit more of a thoughtful view on land use. And they didn't want that. They didn't want the local governments being able to determine whether or not it's the right time to rezone something. So this is a newer thing. Senate Bill 180. This year there's a water bill that's going through that would preempt all forms of water control at the local
Yeah,
level
I
and
read
take
that.
it away. That's the worst bill this entire year. So you're starting to see more of that, and that's becoming the problem, and that's where the public's paying more attention. The public wasn't, some were, don't get me wrong, but not everyone was paying attention about whether or not bars could close down earlier on a preemption. That's not everyone's purview in terms of whether or not they care. But when you start playing with development now, everyone starts caring. When you start talking about wetland buffers, you start talking about FDAB lines, start talking about impact fees. That's made this a little bit more in the forefront, hence conversations like this, because now everybody has a stake in these preemptions.
But you can tell what Mitch was saying, because when you look at some of these bills, the issues that they're addressing are such minuscule issues. I mean, they're all local issues. And so from the perspective of the voters and the regular citizens, is Florida so perfect that we don't have other bigger picture issues that they should be conquering or addressing at the state level, like insurance,
I was
maybe?
just gonna say insurance,
Maybe
please.
insurance, would that be helpful? So.
Mitch or George, either one of you, can you just give a little recap about SB 180 and what Manatee County tried to do as far as
I'll
protecting its
defer to the
wetland?
commissioner on that one.
Yeah, well, SB 180, I mean, I'm sure most people know what it is, but if they don't, last year, Senate Bill 180 passed. Well, Senate Bill 180 passed the Senate as a good bill. It was called a bill an act for emergencies. And the intent was to make sure that every county municipality had locations for sandbags and had evacuation maps up and had thoughtful ways of doing it. It was a very good bill. During the last week of regular session got extended, but during the last week of the regular session where bills could be heard, the House inserted additional language back into it that was originally in the House bill. So they claim, it's always been there. No, it's always in the House bill. That wasn't moving. They put it into the Senate bill that was already approved. That basically preempted any rights for any local government to make any changes to their comprehensive plan and land development code that made it, quote unquote, more burdensome to developers to be able to build. It was supposed to be based upon hurricane repair and getting your town back in order. That was how they kept implying it was, letting people rebuild their house or getting a business reopened. We all agree with that. What it was extrapolated to mean and how it's been interpreted by the executive branch in Tallahassee, like Florida Commerce, is everything from whether or not you can increase your impact fees on development that didn't exist at the time, whether you can increase your wetland buffers to help with the flooding that resulted from those storms. Again, none of this had to do with properties that even existed at the time. So it's been very broadly interpreted.
So the failure has been that they have not distinguished between new development and fixing things that were hurt by the storm.
Correct. So we, along with Orange County and 25 cities, sued the state. That's an ongoing lawsuit right now, so I can't overly go into it, but we've actively sued the state trying to get that stayed so we can move forward. We had already voted to move forward with fixing our FDAB line and increasing our impact fees and putting our wetlands back. We can't do any of those things right now. The state won't allow us to do them. There is a bill this year by Senator DeSigley up in Pinellas County. It's Senate Bill 840 that does, in my opinion, fix the problem. I mean, top down, I think it's a substantially better glitch fix than I expected this year. However, yesterday at 5 p.m. was the deadline for bill filing, and nobody from the House of Representatives filed a meaningful companion bill. So that will not get heard on the House side of it until the Senate's done with it, which makes this a very, very tough carry in terms of getting that bill
Unlikely
done.
that it would happen during this session.
Let's hope that's not the case. There are some bills that kind of tangentially dance around Senate Bill 180. Senator Gates has one on the Senate side, but there's a companion bill for that one on the House side. And Representative Andrade filed one late yesterday that also touches on Senate Bill 1. So they could get modified and amended to more closely match. I think that's the number one thing people need to be doing, is reaching out to your House reps and telling them to get their bill to match Senate Bill 840. That's critically important to this session.
Mark, I'm going to get you in just a minute. Don't think I'm leaving you out, but
I'm fine.
I'd like Mitch to talk a little bit about the flipping of the Manatee County Commission in 2024 and what was behind that that relates to this issue.
Yeah, that was the most amazing thing I've seen in my career as a journalist. And that was because you had a post-Citizens United election, the only one I'm aware of in the United States, to be honest with you, in which the special interests had moved so far beyond the pale, and they had caught the attention of so many otherwise disengaged citizens that just finally woke up and said, hey, what's going on here? Why can't I get to someplace in 45 minutes I used to be able to get to in 20? Why are we having so many algal blooms? Why are these mats of green algae clogging up the canals? And who's responsible and how can we fix this? And it created a level of community engagement that was just enormously impressive, to the point where, and I've said this a long time, when people said, oh, we'll never get anywhere until we fix, get the money out of politics. The reality is money in politics only works when people aren't closely engaged. You can't tell somebody who's watching with their eyes that they're not seeing what they're seeing. You can influence someone who votes without really voting responsibly, who just kind of goes with the feel and, checks the news once in a while. Those mailers, those commercials will work in those senses. So people asked me going into it, is this going to be the year? Is this finally going to be the year? And I kept saying, I don't know, because I've never seen it. I don't know what it looks like. I know what it looks like when it feels like people are really angry and then money still wins in a landslide. I know when it gets a little closer. I don't know how bad it has to get before it actually takes hold. But this happened. We had, and it was instrumental that it was all in the primary. If it would have been in the general election, it wouldn't have happened, because the general election carries way too many straight ticket voters, especially in the presidential year, that it would have just canceled out all those engaged voters. But we had people that got very engaged in the primary, didn't listen to the noise, knew who they were voting for and why, and in every race, the developer-funded candidate, who often was running with sometimes as high as 10-1 in one of the races in terms of dollars, if you add the PAC and the campaign treasury, every one of them lost in a landslide. It wasn't even close. It showed you that an engaged community cannot be bought with political advertising. And that's kind of the lesson to take from that, is that if we can get more people paying attention to things they're angry about and divorce themselves from the sort of, political bipartisanship in which they can't accept that it might be somebody on my team who's doing a thing I don't like, and really discern who's fighting for me and who's fighting for the people writing those big checks. It's not that hard. When you see the person that has $250,000 and the person that has 10, that's a pretty good indication on who's going to be working for special interests and who's going to be working for their community. And we flipped that board. We flipped it to only find, hey, we have a whole bunch of preemption now, so we haven't been able to affect really any of the meaningful changes that they were elected to affect, and that has left the citizenry understandably frustrated. But again, my message is you have to take that same engagement to the state level, which is where we see the least. When we look at our metrics for how many articles, how many reads they get, it's always the top stories in government are always a flip depending on how juicy they are, either with local, school board or county commission, sometimes city council, or a national story. It is never the state. Rarely. Like, it has to be the biggest scandal before the state really gets a lot of attention. And if it's just a good government state story, it might get 20% of the reads of a local one. So until we get that engagement up, and a lot of that is the 60-day session, which is really, it's not conducive, I don't think, to a state that's as big and as profoundly changing as Florida is. But like George said, just the idea that if you don't have a companion bill in the other chamber in a 60-day session, the chance of it getting through and then getting heard on the other, it's a time crunch. A lot of things die on the vine. They've got to get the budgets passed. Sometimes they don't even do that. Last year we needed a special session just for that to happen. So it's not really set up to get a lot of work done in those 60 days.
Right.
So until we have citizens putting those state representatives' feet to the fire, and until they start to fear your vote more than they fear that check getting written to an opponent, then I fear that things won't really change.
Man, I wish every voter, a local voter, could have heard that, because I think it's very igniting. Yeah. If you're just joining us, this is WSLR's Talk of the Town. I'm your host, Carrie Seidman, and we've been hearing from Manatee County Commissioner George Kruse, Mitch Maley of the Bradenton Times, and Mark Hebden. Well, we haven't heard from Mark yet, but I'm going to turn to Mark now. Mark is with the grassroots group Save Florida Home Rule, which is based in the Anna Maria Island area. So, Mark, tell us a little bit about Save Florida Home Rule and how that came to be through engaged citizens.
Well, that's exactly what Mitch was just talking about. It was engaged citizens, and there were things that were happening on Anna Maria Island that just got everybody had enough. And the idea was, the first was that they were going to consolidate the three cities, and that the state was going to move in and just say, we're going to consolidate the three city governments. In fact, they did a study that said, well, let's see if we can connect it to Bradenton City, or make it chartered into Manatee County. And the impacts of that on us in terms of taxpayers would have been terrible. And then there was the parking garage. I mean, this is an example of some of the things we've been talking about. There was a parking garage that they wanted to put on the island. So you want to put a parking garage on a barrier island. First of all, the budget was way too low, because it was based on a budget that was going to be for a parking garage downtown, as opposed to one on a hurricane-exposed barrier island that's basically a sandbar. But the worst thing was they were going to preempt Holmes Beach, which had ordinances against these things. They were going to just roll over that. The whole legislature, for the legislative information and bills, were saying that we would have no say in that whatsoever. And so that really, it got people riled up, and it's what it takes. And so Save Florida Home Rule came out of that. And there's at least 20 people that are on the steering committee, and Barbara Aaron is our leader and chairperson. And through that, we organized, there was at least 2 or 3 rallies of 300 or 400 people, a massive communication campaign, and part of that was against the county leaders that were pushing these things and saying they wanted to have control over Anna Maria and all of the cities. But the motivation behind it, and what was driving it, was the developer interest, because they wanted to consolidate the cities, because then it would be easier to change the ordinances, because they look at Anna Maria and say, well, the reason people come to Anna Maria is because it's a old Florida character, low rise, lower density. It's much different than, for example, Longboat Key. But from a developer standpoint, I used to work for developers and an architect. They look at it and say, I see land that's underdeveloped. I see height. I see dollars. I see more units. I see more density. And so they're doing whatever they can to influence, as Mitch has been saying, influence these races. But the only thing we were successful in pushing back, but the problem is it's ongoing. And one of the things we have to work at as an organization is getting to the state level. And based on what you were just saying about the shortness of the legislative time period, it's really difficult to get to the state leaders. And also, they don't come to us like George and other the county members do. We have to go to them and track them down. And literally deliver information to them that is doing what Mitch is saying, which is saying you're going to lose votes. And I do think it helped a little bit that the county changed over, because I think some of the representatives got the message and they backed off. So they backed off on the consolidation. But I don't think that's gone. You and I were talking before with the program, is that I think they're going to revive that. And I want to encourage voters, like Mitch is saying, is to pay attention to these races, because right now I see the issue that I think there's commissioners being seated in every one of the Anna Maria communities that are going to be in favor of a city manager type government. Because the city manager then, instead of electing commissioners and a mayor, the citizens only elect the commissioners, and then the commissioners contract with the city manager. And this goes back to the issue that George was saying. Well, suddenly we have to have experts to run the to run the country, to run the city, to run our communities. And the fact is, that's insulting to all of us as voters, because there's capable people in all these communities. There's people out in this audience that are capable of dealing with these issues. And so they're going to get, the plan is, you can almost see it, they're going to get a city manager contract in Bradenton Beach, and oh, by the way, that city manager contract's going to be the same city manager contract in Holmes Beach, and it's going to be the same city manager contract in Anna Maria. Now what do you have? You have a city manager that they can influence. You've narrowed down who you can influence as a developer to get the things you want changed. And so the warning is to everybody, please pay attention to all these local elections, and talk to your commissioner candidates and say, what do you think about these different types of government? What do you think about the charter? We have to get to that, the charter county issue, because that's, I mean, George, you were involved in that.
Yeah, let's move into that a little bit, because I know early on in your tenure, George, you introduced the idea of potentially having Manatee become a charter government, and more recently, your current chair of the commission, Tal Siddiqui, has very much pushed for that idea, and you seem to have backed off a little bit. So talk about what that would do if that happened in Manatee, and what are some of the pluses and minuses?
Sure. Yes, in 2021, I proposed looking into a chartered county. I guess it's not that I backed off. I still think there's validity to it, and I told him as much when he brought it up the other day in his State of the Chair. I guess the issue becomes everybody wants their own free will with limited government and people not looking over them. But then it's like, where does my charter fall in with people like out on Anna Maria? You know, every bigger government seems to want to pick on the slightly smaller government. I mean, at the state level now, because I think we're swinging back too much at the county level. Now they're going after HOAs. They're just looking for the next smallest thing. After that, it's going to be the PTO. Like they're just looking for somebody who's not going to fight back. Oh, so the charter has, the reason I liked it is because the state keeps preempting things from us, so it gives us some control. That said, they're cracking into them now. You see it in Sarasota, the $200 campaign limits. At one point in time, City of Sarasota was talking about ranked choice voting, and then that got made illegal by the state level. So charters aren't the protection that they used to be. They've cracked into them. I liked it because it gave us the opportunity to have meaningful discussion with our public about how we want to vote on rezones. With the charter, you can make it a supermajority instead of a straight majority. Do we want to have recall if you don't like your elected officials, if they do something meaningfully wrong? If you want to have term limits, there's a lot of structural things that would give the public more say because it allows you control that the state doesn't have. That said, the municipalities at the time all wanted to fight me about it because the mayors told me once that charter's in place, there's nothing that precludes some future board that maybe doesn't have the best interests of the cities and just talking about the density on the island. Some future board or some future charter review committee can propose the county taking over the development rights of the municipalities. And their argument is there's only about 70,000 people in Manatee County living in a municipality. There's another 400,000 people in Manatee County that are in unincorporated. So they can vote however they want. And if you go and tell 400,000 people in Manatee County, I can lower your taxes by increasing my tax base over here on this little island, that's a problem. So that's why I backed off a little, because there could be some unintended consequences. I still support the concept of a charter if it's done right.
Would you agree, George? I've always felt like for a charter county to be effective, you need a deeply engaged community. That's what kind of offsets that double-edged sword.
You do, but you also have a charter review board, which still
Well,
has
that's
to
what I
run.
mean,
Which still has to
you need
run
them
for
voting.
election. I mean,
Right.
you start seeing even hospital boards here with a lot of money in those elections
Right. That's what I'm saying.
for free
you
jobs.
You need a community that is so deeply engaged that none of these things should be
So
involved.
deeply engaged that they know what the charter review
Yes,
board
exactly.
does,
Yeah.
and they
Knows
know
it exists.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
so a charter is a way to go back to the topic at hand. It is a way to help stop some of the home rule being taken away, but it doesn't stop all of it. There's goods and bads to it. I'm open to the discussion. It's something we're going to look into in Manatee County. Whether or not it happens, I don't know. It's not going to happen next month. I mean, it's a multi-year process to get that done. But it is a way that any local county, I believe there's 47 of us that do not have charters. All cities, by definition, have charters. So there are some of us that can have a charter. Sarasota does. So we are looking into it, and part of it is because of the home rule being stripped away in the preemptions. But we'll see where that goes.
Would that have to be voted by the county, by the voters?
Have target, yes.
We'd have to go to
Yeah.
referendum. Can I piggyback real quick off something that Mark said that's, I think, really instructive to where these negative incentives lie? When we talk about the island, if you look at the island and you see how much land mass it is on a map, and then you see what percentage of our property taxes come from there, it's an enormous imbalance. As a result, you have I would say by far the most politically engaged portion of Manatee County is the island. And that's why you have city elections that run quite differently than they do in the mainland. But if you look at it and you say, we want to take over control of that, when do you see what you can affect? Right now, you have much lower density, and you don't have the height, and you also have far more homesteaded properties. So if you could you can kind of get a twofer here. If you could change that, and you could build up really high with condos, similar to Longboat, you can then, you'll wind up with far fewer homesteaded properties, so not only much more revenue by the density, but by the multiplier of not having homesteaded, and you wind up with a mostly rentals and part-time population that is not engaged at all. So there's a real strong incentive to take over the island and turn it into a Longboat Key, because it actually benefits special interests on multiple levels. So they're playing the long game on some of these things in a way that, and Anna Maria Island has done a remarkable job in terms of self-governance and maintaining its quaint character, all those things that, he said, this is why people move here for. They've done as good as any community on the coastal eastern seaboard that I've come across. And that full court press on now is because it's one of the last remaining places where a developer will look and see nothing but dollar signs as far as the eye can see.
Yeah, I really appreciate you saying that, Mitch, because also sometimes people try and make this a war between the citizens that live on the island, the residents, and tourists. But it's not that, because when you look at why people buy homes there, it's the same reason that people come to the island, to preserve the character of it. People, in fact, we had mailers that we delivered to our, I guess they were really letters that we delivered to, over 1,200 letters that went to the state representatives. And the letters, almost 50% of them were from residents of the island, but the other 50%, or a little bit less than that, were from visitors and people who lived in the county. And they're all saying the same thing: don't allow the island to change, because the reason we come there is because of the character that it has. So nobody wants it to change, except for people who want to drag and draw the money out of it.
Right, exactly. Let's turn to that was excellent. Let's turn to looking a little bit toward the coming legislation session and some of the preemption bills that are currently on the table. I know I was alarmed in looking at a couple things pointed out to me in preparing for the show. For example, I just want to put these on everybody's radar. Senate Bill 1134 and House Bill 1001 would prohibit counties and cities from funding or promoting DEI initiatives, including offices dedicated to those efforts. And here's the worst one. House Bill 479 prohibits counties and municipalities from adopting laws, regulations, rules, or policies relating to water quality or quantity, pollution, control, discharge prevention, or removal or wetlands, and preempt such regulation to the state. Comments?
Yeah, the water one's the one I mentioned. That's the worst bill. The DEI one's just stupid. Like, here's the thing. This we keep talking preemption as if to kind of get it to the topic here, as if it's a blanket all preemption's bad preemption. It's all preemption inherently is not. It's a dirty word, but there's business of the government that the state has to do, and they oversee us. We don't have the same federalism protection at the county level as the state has against the federal level. So there are some that make sense.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. Like, you've got some basic, like I said about making sure every city and county has the maps of shelters and evacuation zones on their website. Some did not. They were just lazy and didn't put it on there. They said, this is ridiculous. We all need to do this. We need to have some uniformity with 911 and things like that. Those are just good things that it's easier just to say, everyone just follow the same rules so everyone knows what's going on. So those make sense. There's even a level of development type things that to some extent makes sense, because my concern is, and I'll play devil's advocate here, I'm very outspoken against taking over home rule, but at the same time I can still at least understand the argument sometimes when it comes to, for instance, let's look at Live Local as an example. If one county voluntarily says, I'm going to substantially increase my amount of affordable housing and increase my density because I'm trying to keep affordability down for my residents, you're increasing the supply, but you're inevitably going to increase the demand unit by unit if the other surrounding counties don't have some assistance in that and also don't do it. If Manatee County all of a sudden doubled all of our density for affordable housing and built 10,000 affordable housing units next year, and Sarasota and Charlotte County and Pinellas County built 0. Guess what? We'll have 10,000 more households move into Manatee County, and we'll just further and further become a low-cost bedroom community for everybody else, because things like affordable housing do not stop at the border. So there is some justification for some of this. There's a right way and a wrong way. But the two we keep talking about that need to be talked about is, one, the stupid preemption for primary sake. Not only is there the DEI one here that you talk about, but I mean, you can't paint your sidewalk. Well, how does this help or hurt anybody? Mm-hmm. How is this best use of anyone's life? Right now, there's a bill going through that would prohibit county governments, or any government for that matter, from spending any tax dollars on nonprofits. Like, literally, you cannot fund any nonprofit. We have a whole millage just for nonprofits in Manatee County. It would prohibit it. How am I supposed to help fund the Turning Points and the Women's Resource Centers and the Early Learning Coalitions and all these?
The most cost-effective way we have of dealing with
Correct.
This.
Yes. If they don't do it for me, then we have to do it for ourselves, or nobody does it. Now all of a sudden you don't have food pantries, you don't have anything. It's stupid, and there's no reason behind it. It's mean-spirited solely for the sake of someone putting something on a campaign flyer. That's the one kind of preemption.
And that's exactly what we're talking about that incentive in a one-party rule, is that will get you points in a primary. Look, I'm more anti-woke than my opponent, and you have these actual bills in a 60-day session, wasting time, going through committees, getting votes, when real work that we're talking about isn't getting done.
Mm-hmm. Correct. So, like I said, there are some preemptions that just make sense. It trends down. The two preemptions and home rule takeaways that are bad are, one, just the stupid ones because people just want to grandstand about doing something stupid because that gets them votes, and the other one is the ones that truly don't help the community. They're done specifically for the special interest. They're done specifically for the check for your campaign, and that's where you get into the Senate Bill 180s, the things where we should, there's 67 counties, there's 411 cities. We're all different. Right. And so you can't tell me that my water buffers need to be the same as, DeSoto County. They're not a coastal right. county. We have different needs. And when Debbie comes again and floods half of Manatee County, I'm going to wish I had those wetland buffers. They didn't get flooded out there because they have a different ecosystem. So those are the preemptions where people are just lazy and just try to blanket everything across it. And you're seeing that now with property taxes. Everybody's property, and that's the biggest preemption of them all, because once they get rid, and people don't treat it like a preemption, they treat it like they're looking out for my affordability. No. Once they gut property taxes, all of the money is going to flow to Tallahassee. 100% of it. I don't care what they say. They're saying nothing because the governor hasn't even put out a plan. But it's going to have to come through state, whether it be dock stamps, sales taxes, you name it. And then every one of us, all 67 counties, you have to go up to Tallahassee every year with our budget in our hand and say, please, sir, may I have $1? Because I want to fund this bus route. And they're going, we don't like bus routes. And they're not going to give you your money. They're not even going to have to do preemption anymore. They're going to do preemption by way of budget, simply by just not funding things they don't want to fund and basically force that preemption. Or they're going to say, I'll give you that money for that bus route, but you better put those wetland buffers where I want, or you better approve this rezone over here, and then I'll give you money. And it's just going to become an extortion play of money up in Tallahassee. The real estate tax bill is the single biggest preemption you're going to see come through Tallahassee this year.
Yeah,
And it's going to make the already ranked #1 most regressive tax system of the 50 states far more regressive.
Thank you for adding that, Mitch. Our last show was on the property tax elimination proposal, so look that up in the WSLR archives if you missed it. It was really a great debate. You're listening to a discussion about home rule and state preemption of local governance in Florida on Talk of the Town, WSLR's News Roundtable. I'm your host, Carrie Seidman, and we've been talking with Manatee County Commissioner George Kruse, journalist Mitch Maley of the Bradenton Times, and Mark Hebden of Save Florida Home Rule. I'm going to turn now, because our time is running short, to some questions from the audience, and then I have a final question I want to ask that we get in as well. I'm going to direct this toward Commissioner Kruse because I have to admit, I don't know what the blue ribbon bill is. So what about the blue ribbon bill that cuts out any local review or public hearings?
Sure. That's two different things. The second half of that sentence is the more important one because there's a lot of preemption bills that are essentially just being done to make things administrative. I mentioned the plats, which I agree with that bill because there was no reason for it to be on my agenda. But still, a lot of these preemptions are essentially just saying, you do this, it's administrative, whether it's agritourism or development. The blue ribbon portion of it is a little less important than taking away the public input to it. But the blue ribbon is basically saying if you own a parcel of land that's at least 10,000 acres, and I'm not going to go into detail because there's a lot of nuances to it, then you can essentially build on that administratively for residential. There's a whole laundry list of requirements in terms of 60% conservation open space and a percentage of affordable housing and a percentage of mixed use and commercial. There's a lot to it. I don't disagree with the concept of that particular development. In fact, as Mitch has written probably more than once in his paper, I approved a Gamble Creek project down State Road 62 that was substantially similar, although a little bit smaller than this. I do like the concept of that kind of walkable community like that, but it still requires a very large parcel of land. It's like 4 times larger than Heritage Harbor, Manatee County. It's about 1/3 of the size of all of Lakewood Ranch, is the land mass you would have to own by yourself to even make this eligible. I don't think it really affects Manatee. I believe it's a property up near Jacksonville and one of the Panhandle that's being written for. So people are pushing back on it because it's a preemption taking away the public. It won't go in front of Planning Commission, it won't go in front of Board of County Commissioners, it's administrative. I disagree with that, so that's why this is a bad bill. However, I think if they just spent more time with the carrot and less with the stick, I think you would find a lot of counties that would actually like some of these blue ribbon bills if they actually just came in front of them and were able to be heard thoughtfully and people actually presented 10,000 acre parcels with the bullet points they have in place. I wish they would let us try to see if we're willing to entertain these before they just take it away before we even see it, because we've never seen one.
Thanks. I'm going to direct this one to Mark. What is the current status of the effort to consolidate Ann Maria's cities, and what is Save Florida Home Rule doing to counter that?
The current, I forget what the acronym stands for, George, or OPAGA, but they did the OPAGA study for consolidation, which is a state study group. And they're telling us, the state representatives are telling us that's on the shelf, but as I said earlier, we don't believe that's true, that this is going to be brought back again and the consolidation, because as Mitch was saying, the money that's behind it and the incentives that are behind it are too great for them to pass on this. And the key is understanding that, as you were saying, Mitch, it's a long game, and that So we're paying attention with this, and we're trying to continue to mobilize people. But it has to also be mobilizing people to watch the votes. We regularly check in with George and the county, but also with Minnesota League of Cities and also Florida League of Cities, because they're in the same, they're looking at it from a larger level, statewide level and a county level. But at this point, it's trying to get to and spend more time and face time in front of the state leaders. And as Mitch was saying and George was saying, it's very hard to do that, but we're going to have to pick up that effort because we don't believe that this is a dead issue and it's going to continue, and they're going to continue to look at. Again, I think there's other cities that could fall victim to this too, but the developer potential and the money that can be sucked out of, I hate to say it, out of Anna Maria Island is the reason why it's getting so much attention from the money that backs the developers.
This one's a little bit off our topic, but I'll go ahead and ask it. This is about backflow regulations. Why are regulations in Manatee stricter than in Sarasota, and why are there such variations between counties?
I don't know. I have no idea.
Anybody
I
wanna
didn't know
take
that
a
it was
stab?
stricter.
Okay.
They
Nor
were
did I.
the state requires them to be inspected no less than every other year. Manatee County has them every year. We have looked at adjusting it, but as of now we haven't. My understanding was it's because of some of the water table and so forth that it makes it a little more susceptible, and when we've tried to do it a little bit longer, it's caused some backflow issues with them. So we've just always had it every year. It's environmentally better to do it. It's better so they don't leak or break and cause you a water issue. But we don't have to do it every year. The state just requires every other year.
Why isn't Manatee focusing on the sewer overflow dumping into rivers and canals? This is a major concern, considering 8,000 more housing units that are approved off of Cortez Road.
I'll tell you why. Home rule. That's why. Because that's not Manatee County leaking any of that in. That's City of Bradenton leaking it in there. And if I'm going to sit up here and say that the state shouldn't tell me what to do and control me, I'm not going to tell the City of Bradenton what to do. You should talk to Gene Brown.
And that is in an active lawsuit right now, or it has been settled with what they're determined to, what they've committed to do in terms of fixing that. It's happened slower than I think the timeline was expressed to the community. So I think I think there's a lot of justified frustration with that. And one of them is that you're continuing to have more development connecting to a facility that you already know is overwhelmed. And you're not going to, it's really like the old adage of, sticking your finger in the holes in the dike. I don't think we can develop as rampantly as we are and expect already overworked facilities to ever catch up.
Yeah, but wait a second. I mean, there's a connection between the people in the city and even the state leadership that is approving these developments. And are we getting enough from the developers in terms of impact fees? Because if you're building 8,000 units and you're going to make the profits of 8,000 units, then there has to be some accountability that you're adding this volume capacity to the sewer system.
Sure. Well, that would come from facility investment fees, but the point's well taken. They're similar. But again, that's been my argument. I think right after I got on this board, I was on a podcast with you, and I said we should increase impact fees, and people looked at me like, why would you say that out loud? This board doesn't talk about that. But I've said it from the start. People should just pay whatever it costs. It's not my job to subsidize for-profit anything. And if they don't want to pay it, then go build someplace else. And eventually my housing will become more expensive because of lack of supply, that now you can afford to pay what I need you to pay to cover your cost of growth because the housing prices have gone up. That's how the free market works if we ever go back to being a free market country, which we're 100% not right now. So facility investment fees are also massively low in Manatee County. I try to pass a vote to increase those and do the study on them. City of Bradenton does have the money now. They've been able to ascertain. Their biggest issue has been their pipes. They have very old systems. They got these clay pipes, and so they have to line them. That's their number one issue. Once they get that done, it's going to help a lot. Not all, but a lot. But it's a 5-year process. They can't physically do it faster. Mayor Brown has told me even if they had $1 billion, they couldn't do it faster in 5 years. There's just not the manpower to do it, and the disruption of ripping everything up couldn't happen any faster. Once they line all those pipes, it's going to help a lot. 'Cause a lot of what you read about is through leakage of cracks in old, very old pipes. And so they are going through that process. They already started it last year, so they're probably 1 year into a 5-year program, and that's going to help a lot.
Thank you.
We're running out of time, but I want to sneak in this last question. You know, I grew up with this idea of think global, act local. But how do you act local when you're losing local control? So can you each give quickly one action item that you can give to our audience, to our listeners? What can we do to fight back against and take a little bit of our local control back?
Wow. I can guess what some of the other answers are going to be, so I'm going to go different. Honestly, just pay attention. Nobody pays attention at the state level. Everyone pays attention at the local level. I'm getting hundreds of emails about an animal shelter right now, but I guarantee my house rep is getting no emails about water bills that preempt our ability to control water capacity. They're not getting the emails. And when they do get emails, everyone's scattered all over the place on 1,000 different bills. Focus on the ones that really are important. I know everyone has their own thing, but seriously, the water bill is extremely important. Exactly. I think the nonprofit one's more important than people give it credit for, because that's going to gut some of our services. The property taxes are incredibly important, but that's going to get through, so I'll wait and fight that battle once we see what we're fighting. Right now, we're just swinging in the dark. And that Senate Bill 840, the one that Senator DeSagley put in to fix Senate Bill 180, which supersedes all other development preemptions we've had. That one's extremely important. We need to start getting in front of people and making sure the good bills get through. They keep hearing about the bad bills. Let's help push some of these good bills, like 840, through as well. I think you'll get more attention if you do that.
Okay, quickly, Mitch.
I would just say, hold your state representatives' feet to the fire. And I just wanted to add, there's a very good piece on that water pollution bill by Greg Pittman that's on the Bradenton Times right now via the Florida Phoenix that I highly recommend reading.
Join into organizations like Save Florida Home Rule, form other organizations, because it's easier in numbers. I mean, people can write their own individual letters, but if you go on the websites for Save Florida Home Rule, there's letters pre-written for you on these issues to go ahead and get the information out there. So to be heard, it's easier to be organized into a group.
Excellent. All right, quickly, before we run out of time, it's our tradition at the end of Talk of the Town to have our panelists each give us their headline prediction on this topic of what is to come about Florida Home Rule. Commissioner Kruse.
You start with me, huh?
Oh, I can go. Mitch, I know Mitch is ready.
I've got mine. Mine is Tallahassee abolishes local governments. State representatives will decide all ordinances.
That's actually where I was going. Yeah. No, I was going to say the same thing. I mean, the reality is once home rule goes away, then there's really no reason. We're wards of the state. Counties were created by the state, not by ourselves, not by the federal government. They can theoretically unwind us anytime they want. At some point, they're going to say this is just a waste of money, and CFO Angolia is going to say, why are we spending all this money running all these governments? We can just do it ourselves like we are. So, I think.
So you're a good commissioner. You're a really poor headline writer. I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry. Okay, sorry. Okay.
Mark, how about you?
I'll go with it. Governor DeSantis signs bill abolishing all 67 counties, appoints himself chairman of the to-be-formed county commission for the state of Florida due to his impending unemployment.
I love it. Mark.
Well, I see two headlines next to each other. One is state passes bill for the number of toilets you can have in a rental unit, and then right next to it says another 1 million gallons of sewage is dumped in the Manatee River.
Please help me thank our guests today. Talk of the Town takes place on the second Saturday of each month and always in front of a live audience here at Fogartyville, so please come join us if you haven't been here yet. If you can't be with us or you miss a program, you can always access past shows on the WSLR.org archive by podcast or on WSLR's YouTube channel. We'll next be back January 14th. That's Valentine's Day. What better way to start off the day with your sweetheart than at Talk of the Town? At that time, the legislature will have been in session for a month, so I'm sure that we'll have plenty to talk about. Thanks to the Gulf Coast Community Foundation for its support of Talk of the Town, to today's panelists, our staff, volunteers, and donors, and thanks to all of you in the audience and listening elsewhere for making Talk of the Town part of your weekend. Until next month, this is your Talk of the Town host, Carrie Seidman, saying, please take care of each other and carry on.